We are privileged to host Yaakov Katz, military correspondent and defense analyst of the Jerusalem Post, the major English language newspaper in Israel. And I know that many of you are familiar with his articles. Almost 3 years ago to the day, CJHS hosted Yaakov Katz, and we are honored to have the opportunity to host him again at this extremely critical time for Israel. In addition to his work for the Jerusalem Post, Yaakov Katz is the Israel correspondent for Jane's Defense Weekly, the international military magazine. His first book, Israel versus Iran, The Shadow War, was published in Israel in March of 2011 and was a national bestseller. It will be published in the US by the fall. Has it?
It's been pushed up to the beginning of the year.
Okay. So just after Hanukkah for late Hanukkah gifts, right? Okay. Katz led the Post's coverage of the recent IDF wars and operations, including the Second Lebanon War against Hezbollah in 2006, and Operation Cast led in the Gaza Strip in 2009. Originally from Chicago, Katz moved to Israel in 1993 and served in the IDF Armored Corps. He lectures widely in the US and Israel on military affairs, lives in Jerusalem with his wife and 3 daughters, and has a law degree from Bar-Ilan University.
A week and a half ago, when Gilad Schalit was brought home, we know scientifically, right, there are studies that have been done by the Israeli defense establishment that 60% of prisoners, because this isn't the first time we've done swaps like this, we've done them before, 60% of those released return to engage in terrorist activity. So that means that you know that out of that 1,000 or so terrorists that you've released, 600 of them are going to try to stick it to you again. You also know from studies that have been done by the defense establishment in Israel that 15 to 20% are re-imprisoned in Israeli jails. So you have to ask yourself, is this not national suicide? Now I think that you could even say something more. You know that you are encouraging terrorism because you are showing Hamas, Hezbollah, terrorist organizations like them, that terrorism pays. And therefore, the next Israeli soldier to be kidnapped, unfortunately, it's a question of time till they try to do it. Hopefully, they won't succeed. But they now are encouraged and motivated to press forward and to try to do this again. That's on the one hand. Now, there is another flip side to this deal. That flip side is what I think is exactly the difference and what is the distinction, what makes Israel special in comparison to all of its neighbors throughout the Middle East. Look, we saw about, also a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, the capture of Muammar Gaddafi, and trust me, I have no pity or mercy for that man. But you saw the way he was captured and brutally killed and lynched by that mob, right? Those people who surround us in the Middle East, Hamas, Hezbollah, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, whatever it might be, they worship death. But Israel sanctifies life. And for that reason, it's willing to take huge risks in order to get back one Israeli soldier. Similar to the risks that it took back in 1972 when Bibi Netanyahu led soldiers into Lebanon to capture Syrian intelligence officers. And like in 1976 when his brother, as the commander of Sayeret Matkal, flew to Entebbe, Uganda and paid with his life to release the Air France hostages. Now, I'll say even more than that. You could make a strong security argument in favor of the deal. Why is that? Because out of the 477 who were released a week and a half ago, the vast majority of them were deported either to the Gaza Strip or overseas. Only 110 returned to the West Bank and to East Jerusalem, 96 specifically to the West Bank and 14 to East Jerusalem. Out of that 110, only half are Hamas operatives or terrorists. And out of those half who are Hamas terrorists, all of them have to have travel restrictions. They can't leave the country. They can't go into Israel. And once a month, they have to go sign in at a police station, whatever it might be. But out of all of the deals possible, from an Israeli security perspective, this is possibly the best deal that they could have gotten. And therefore, why? Because all the rest who went to Gaza, there's already 30, 40,000 armed terrorists in Gaza who are trying to kill us on a daily basis. So the argument goes, what's another 300? On a more immediate level, definitely with the encouraging, the motivation, that's a separate question. And why do I start and open with Gilad Shalit? Because I think that when we look outside today and look at what's called the Arab Spring, but is definitely more of an Islamic winter, I think there's no question about it. When we look at it today, there are huge, immense, unbelievable challenges, but at the same time, unique opportunities. One of those opportunities was Israel's ability to reach a deal with Hamas and secure the release of Gilad Shalit. Why? Hamas's headquarters are in Damascus. Khalid Mashal, the top Hamas terrorist, resides in Damascus. Now, no secret what's happening in Syria today. Assad is potentially falling. Hamas understands that it will have to move its headquarters to another location. Now, they've been offered sanctuary by Iran to set up shop in Tehran. They don't want to go to Tehran. It's far away from Gaza. They want to be close to Gaza. They've been offered to move to Qatar. Qatar's also far away. So what if they want to move to Cairo? And you probably have watched online or on the news that brutal, cruel, abusive interview that Egyptian journalist did with Gilad Shalit. Which, by the way, I have to say, and I'm a little cynical, but there was that one question that everyone took issue with about, so are you going to campaign for the release of more Palestinian prisoners? That I thought was, fine, I can understand she's Egyptian, whatever. The best question in my eyes was when she asked him, so Gilad, tell me, there was only one video of you that came out during your captivity. Why weren't there more? And I was wondering to myself, so did she expect him to say, well, Shahira, I'm a little shy and I didn't want to be filmed. I mean, it was really up to him to make the decision whether Hamas was going to film him and make a video or not. I mean, so obscene. But anyhow, putting that aside for a moment, one of the guys, if you later saw, there were pictures that were distributed to the media, and there was a man with a nicely trimmed beard standing over Gilad during the interview. That's Abu Marzouk. Abu Marzouk is the deputy of Khalid Mashal. He's already set up an office in Cairo. Hamas wants to move its bases, its headquarters to Cairo. Now that has enabled Egypt, it's given Egypt new leverage, the ability to apply new pressure on Hamas. So that's how Egypt got Hamas to ease up its demands. At the same time, this Arab Spring of sorts, this ongoing upheaval, made Netanyahu understand, because he for years had been opposed to such a deal, made Netanyahu understand that that window of opportunity to get back Shalit is fast closing, or is quickly closing. And therefore, you have to pay the price now, because who knows what will happen in a few months from now? Who knows who will be in Egypt? Who knows what would happen to Gilad Shalit, might be moved elsewhere, and we could have on our hands another case of Ron Arad, the Israeli Air Force navigator who went down in the 1980s over Lebanon and whose fate is still unknown and is a mystery till today. But I think that if we take a closer examination, or we zoom in on this so-called Arab Spring, if there's one word to best characterize and describe it today, it is uncertainty. Why uncertainty? Because no one knows what's going to happen. No one knows, will the Muslim Brotherhood definitely take over in Egypt? All assessments are is that they will gain about a third of the parliament, if not more. They're not running a candidate at the moment for presidency. But what effect will that have on Egypt? No one clearly knows. When will Assad fall? Will he fall? Will he not fall? Who will succeed Assad in Syria? Whose hands will all of his extensive ballistic missiles, he's got hundreds, if not thousands, of Scud-Cs and Scud-Ds. He's got one of the most extensive chemical capabilities in the region, and he's got his hand in biological weapons as well. Whose hands will all that fall into? And then you get into the whole question of, is the devil you know, Assad, better than the devil you don't know? Who is the devil you don't know? No one knows. I just recently had a briefing with the head of military intelligence a few weeks ago, and I said to him, who is the potential successor you identify for Bashar Assad in Syria? And this is the head of Israel's military intelligence. And you know what he told me? I don't know. And I found that to be amazing. This same general, Aviv Kochavi is his name, recently convened he was recently appointed to head what's known as Aman, right? Agaf HaModi'in, military intelligence. And he convened all of the top brass in a room and put on a movie for them. The movie was a short 2.5, 3-minute clip, which showed a map of the Middle East, of North Africa. And you see how the colors changed over the countries and over the region. And it basically was the history of empires. Starts with the Egyptian kingdom, moves through the Hittites, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Ottomans, and then all the way up to, and then of course the British, and all the way up to modern day with the establishment of states and borders. And his message was very clear. Everything changes, and everything ultimately will change. But for the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, it needs to be prepared. And that's exactly where the IDF is today. How can they prepare for challenges that they don't know yet how they will play out? And this uncertainty is at the core of the challenge. Because on the one hand, if we look at Israel, right, in 1979, everyone knows Israel made peace with Egypt. And the wars that were assumed to be of what we had fought in the past, like in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where Israel was surprised and attacked from Syria in the north, and Egypt in the south, were believed to be things of the past. That created a state of luxury for the IDF, because since then, since the peace accords and the peace treaty with Egypt, the IDF has only had to focus on the northern border, Lebanon, Syria, and on the counter-terror operations it had to conduct within the Palestinian territories and the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank. But now suddenly, the reality is today that a future war could potentially include two multiple fronts at the same time. No one knows. And therefore, the IDF today does not have enough fighter squadrons, fighter jets, attack helicopter squadrons. It doesn't have enough divisions, brigades, battalions. And that's where the IDF is today. It's in drafting new procurement plans, establishing new training regimens, building up new formations, all aimed at being able to counter the potential threats it could face. Now, I'm not saying that war with Egypt is going to happen tomorrow, God forbid, and probably not in 5 years, and maybe not even in 10 years, but you still have to be prepared. And with the challenges that it's facing, let's take a look at Egypt. Egypt is one of the most formidable conventional militaries in the region. While Israel, since the 79 peace treaty, received $2.5 billion, upped after the Second Lebanon War in 2006 to $3 billion, Egypt has received 1.5 billion, and they've used it smartly. They have 900 Abrams tanks. They recently submitted an order. Pentagon notified Congress of an order to purchase another 130. We'll up them to 1,030 tanks. They have F-16s. They have Harpoon missiles. They got Apache helicopters. They have the largest naval fleet in the region. A future war that could include Egypt would be very, very difficult for the state of Israel. But when you look at the larger picture, I think there's no question today that the greatest, the winner, the victor, the one country that's gaining the most from everything that's happening is Iran. Iran looks today throughout the region and says to itself, Mubarak's gone in Egypt, Ben Ali in Tunisia, the king, the leader of Yemen might be falling, might not. Assad looks like he's on his way out. Gaddafi was brutally killed and shot. But we're still here. The clerics, the ayatollahs, the leaders, the mullahs of Iran are still in power. And they're not facing any real, genuine resistance that has the potential to topple them. Even though we know of the existence of the Green Movement. But the Green Movement, which popped its head above ground following the June 2009 rigged elections, when Ahmadinejad stole those elections and won a second term, we haven't really seen them since. And therefore, you see that Iran today is more daring in what it's willing to do. For example, a few weeks ago it announced that it's moving advanced fifth-generation centrifuges from the Natanz fuel enrichment facility, its main facility for the enrichment of uranium, to a new facility burrowed in a mountain near the city of Qom, called the Fordow facility. This was a facility exposed or discovered back in September of 2009. And Defense Minister Ehud Barak has said before that it is a facility which is immune to conventional military strikes. In addition to that, Iran has also announced its intention to deploy warships on a permanent basis to the Mediterranean. Why? Why would they need warships in the Mediterranean? What interest do they have in the Mediterranean? I don't think we have to be majorly concerned by the presence of Iranian ships in the Mediterranean. But I think the concept, the signal that they're sending by traversing the Suez Canal from the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea to the Mediterranean is meant to send a message to the world. While all these regimes are falling and everybody else is being toppled, we're still here and we are strong. And that is possibly the most dangerous reality that we're facing today. Because an emboldened Iran, which is on its track to obtaining a nuclear weapon, is not just a risk and a danger to Israel, but is a danger for the entire Western world. Now, you've probably all been reading about the saber rattling that's been going on in Israel over the past few days. Next week on Tuesday, on November 8th, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, in Vienna, the UN's nuclear watchdog, is meant to issue a new report about Iran's nuclear program, and for the first time, really expose intelligence information and details about what's called the weapons group. Right? Iran, we know today, has 5 tons of low-enriched uranium. That's enriched about a 3% level. They've taken 600 kilograms of that low-enriched uranium, sent it through the centrifuges again, and enriched it to 20% levels. Right? That's what they claim that they're doing it for their TRR, the Tehran Research Reactor, where they do medical experiments. But the jump from 20 to 90% is military grade. HEU, high enriched uranium, is a short jump. According to intelligence assessments, if Iran were to decide today to go to what's known as the breakout stage and begin to enrich uranium to higher levels, it would take anywhere from 6 to 12 months till they had an SQ, a significant quantity for one nuclear weapon. What Iran is doing, though, is while they have the fissionable material, we know they also have the delivery systems. We've seen their missiles, the Shihab, the Sajil, the Ashura. By the way, they're making huge progress with their missiles. They recently moved from liquid fuel to solid fuel. What's the importance of it? I don't want to bore you with the technology, but in short, liquid fuel is like a gas tank that you have to fill up very close to launch because it has a very short shelf life. It, I guess, evaporates. Solid fuel has a longer shelf life, and it also increases the range and accuracy of your missile. But what does that mean, shelf life? Is that if I build a missile silo, and Iran recently showcased its missile silos, I can then store a missile that's already, whose tank is full of solid fuel, underground, close the hatch, and then only open it when I'm ready to fire and fire immediately. It makes it much more difficult for a country that might be at war with you to locate, detect, intercept, and destroy your missiles, which the liquid fuel, you have to fill up their gas tank, and therefore you have more time to identify, detect, and destroy them. So they're moving forward. The third component of their program, though, is the weapon. And this report that's meant to come out next Tuesday is supposed to tell us new information about the weapon. Now, what is that meant to do, ultimately? Israel hopes that it will serve as the justification, and it will give legitimacy to the world to impose tougher, sharper sanctions on Iran. That Israel hopes will then have the effect and maybe get Iran to change its current course of action. I think the saber rattling we've been seeing over the past few days, there was a missile test in Israel, there was an exercise with the Italians over Sardinia, there have been reports of Netanyahu trying to recruit a majority in his inner cabinet for a potential strike against Iran. But it's all aimed at showing the world that if you don't take this report seriously and you don't move forward with sanctions, Israel has a viable military option on the table. Let me just say one more thing about that. Israel, as we all know, is a tiny country with limited capabilities. I always say we got one aircraft carrier, but it's called the State of Israel. That's it. We can't move it anywhere else, right? Like some other countries have these aircraft carriers. But Israel, from my understanding, and what I've learned from talking with people in the IDF and as I worked on my book, Israel versus Iran, Israel has the ability to fly the distance to Iran and to take out some of their key nuclear facilities. Will they be able to eradicate the program? No. Will they be able to set it back? Yes. And as was explained to me by one of the top IDF generals, who today actually serves as the chief of staff, Lieutenant General Benny Gantz, but this was 2-3 years ago before he became the IDF chief of staff. They were able to do something what he called a bridge loan, right? When you And it was explained to me, I don't know economics, and that's why I do what I do, and I don't deal with money. But if you want to buy a house, but you have yet to sell your own house, let's say, so you take a quick, fast loan from the bank, it bridges the gap for you. You buy the new house, and then you have that high interest loan that you got to pay, but meanwhile, you hope you sell your home, and then you pay off the loan that you took. So it bridges the gap for you. That's basically what Israel's capabilities are. But what you have to understand is that even if, and this is what I always say, can Israel do it alone? Does it need America's help? Does it not need U.S. assistance? Any strike against Iran would still require Israel, to some extent, to coordinate with the United States for one simple reason. Who's going to deal with the fallout the day after? Who's going to push forward the diplomatic initiative that will be required or follow-up strikes to prevent Iran from rebuilding its capabilities? Right? See, you're going to have America on your side somehow. And therefore, I think, in general, when you kind of look at everything that's happening today, it's fascinating that just 2 days ago, your country entered the election year. Right? Why is that interesting? Because for Israel, and I say this speculation / some information that I've learned from people in the Prime Minister's office, is that there might make some sense in waiting to see what happens come November 2012. In other words, if President Obama, is elected again, then Israel will have to decide what it does. But maybe, from an Israeli perspective, maybe Israel might get lucky, and you might get someone else elected as president. And therefore, you might have a reality of where, from an Israeli perspective, for Netanyahu, it might be more comfortable to have a Republican as the president of the United States, whether it's Herman Cain, Rick Perry, Mitt Romney, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not advocating. I'm not pushing. I'm completely nonpartisan. I don't get involved in any of these issues. But I think that, I will say, though, that some of these presidential or Republican candidates I just listen to what they say. They seem more right-wing than Israeli right-wingers, for example. I know comments I've heard by Rick Perry, but in general, maybe Netanyahu's thinking is don't rock the boat now over the coming year. Wait to see what happens. Wait to see who's elected. If it's President Obama for a second term, then you'll have to deal with it. But if it's a new Republican who's elected president, that might change things. Maybe it's time to reevaluate. Maybe you'll have a more sympathetic ear in the White House. A, for dealing with the Iranian nuclear threat, and B, for the Palestinian issue, right? Who knows what might happen? And therefore, I wonder if maybe over the coming year, Israel might just say, sit tight, wait to see what happens come elections in November of 2012. Now, with that said, though, there's no question that the window of opportunity for a strike against Iran is quickly closing. Why is that? Iran, as I mentioned before, is moving centrifuges to the second facility near Qom. They're dispersing their technology. They've proven their capability to enrich uranium. They have the delivery system. They're working on the weapon. As more and more as they disperse and as they accumulate more and more enriched uranium, it will become more and more difficult to effectively strike, penetrate, and set back their nuclear development. And therefore, I think that this year, this coming year of 2012, is going to be extremely critical for Israel when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. Now, I'm going a bit long, but I want to just shine some light also on what I think Israel's doing right now in order to, on the one hand, deal with these threats, counter them, but also be able to be prepared for the future challenges. If I look at Israel at the moment, I think that we can split up the Israeli preparations to 3 different but parallel tracks. The first track is training. It's no secret. The 2006 war with Hezbollah, the Second Lebanon War, the IDF did not fare as well as it would have liked to, right? Soldiers were rusty, commanders were rusty, and this was a direct consequence, it's no secret, of the 6 years of counter-terror operations they were conducting in the West Bank and Gaza, because when you go to get a potential suicide bomber in Jenin, Jericho, Nablus, or Qalqilia, or Gaza City, you don't go with a division or a brigade or even a battalion. You go with a squad of maybe 15, 20 soldiers. Suddenly comes the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel's got to move into Lebanon with brigades and battalions, and the commanders just didn't know how to do it. And therefore, what we saw immediately after the war and continues till today is this unprecedented boost and increase in training. Key word in the IDF today, interoperability. How do I get my Air Force to fight with my Navy, to fight with my infantry, my engineering, my artillery, everybody to come together to give Israel that edge it requires on the battlefield? The second track is what I call the qualitative military edge, the QME. This is made possible without a doubt by significant assistance Israel receives from the United States, $3 billion, allows Israel to buy, for example, F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, fifth-generation stealth fighter jets, but also has a lot to do with Israel's own development of these systems, like the Iron Dome, the counter-rocket defense system, or like the Trophy, which is an active protection system for Merkava tanks, which can intercept anti-tank missiles, right, RPGs that are fired at those tanks, and it's deployed along the border with the Gaza Strip. But this dates back already to 1953, when then 5 years after Israel's establishment, and I met earlier, I was speaking with this gentleman over here who's a veteran of the 1948 war. 5 years after Israel was established in 1948, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion took some time off from work to study a very serious issue. How do we ensure that Israel continues to survive? We're surrounded by millions, tens of millions of Arabs. How do we ensure that we survive? And he came back, he took some time off, went to his little home in the kibbutz of Sde Boker, not far from Bad Echad, right? Where this gentleman's daughter just graduated as an IDF officer a couple weeks ago, so mazal tov to him. But I think that Ben-Gurion came back and he reached a very clear conclusion. And that is that Israel will never have as many soldiers as Syria, will never have as many tanks as Egypt, and will ultimately have the same F-16s as Egypt, the same F-15s as Saudi Arabia. But our soldiers will be better trained, our aircraft will have that add-on Israeli technology, electronic warfare, radar, communications, missile systems that will give it the edge, the qualitative military edge on the battlefield. And today, with the threats Israel faces and the constant military buildup in the region, the continued sale to Egypt, the sale of $60 billion worth of military hardware and new fighter jets to the Saudis, the continued smuggling of missiles into Gaza and Lebanon. Hezbollah today went from 15,000 5 years ago to 50,000 today. Hamas has also moved from a few thousand to 10,000, with greater ranges, larger warheads, better accuracy. That QME is more important today than ever. And the third track is what I like to call the shadow war. The mysterious explosions and assassinations throughout the Arab world, and as Iranian scientists leave their home, motorcycles explode, or magnetic explosive devices attached to their cars as they drive through the streets of Tehran, or the Stuxnet virus is an example, which is fascinating. It's a lecture in of its own. The Stuxnet virus, which violently and aggressively attacked Iran's nuclear facility, putting out of commission about 1,000 centrifuges. This is something that continues. All of this attributed to Israel. Israel, of course, doesn't take credit. But this is part of that campaign to thwart, torpedo, delay, and hopefully stop their terrorist and nuclear military buildup and plans. And I think that when we look over the coming year, there's no question that it's a critical time for Israel. We haven't even gotten into the Palestinian issue, which I think it makes it so clear than ever before that these are not sincere peace partners today. Because it's so obvious. If you were sincere, and I was explaining this to someone the other day on a college campus, if they were sincere, there's a clear way to make peace. Come and sit down at the table and negotiate, right? That's the obvious way. Don't go to UNESCO. Don't go to the United Nations and make unilateral moves. Unilateralism will not give you a Palestinian state. That's obvious. So why are they doing it? And this, I think, is clear to me. We could argue about it, but I think they have one goal today. That is to delegitimize Israel, weaken Israel, isolate Israel, and hope maybe then they'll get a better deal. Maybe that's what they're thinking, but this is not going to give them statehood. This is not going to create peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And the best example is what happened recently with the 193rd state that received recognition by the United Nations, South Sudan. They had a horrible war, genocide, people killed, but then they sat down and negotiated and got a state. That's the way you obtain statehood, not with unilateral action. And I think that unfortunately, there's no other conclusion at the moment except to say that the Palestinians are definitely not interested in a peaceful resolution to the conflict with Israel. But the coming year will be of critical importance. I think it'll be interesting to see how your elections play into those considerations and what happens with Israel. But also, with regards to the window of opportunity for stopping Iran, and also how this Arab Spring will come to a conclusion. Who will take over in these different countries? Who will become the new leaders? What will ultimately happen? And I think that if I look back, and again, I wasn't around since 1948, but I think that if there's one characteristic of Israelis that I think we can all take pride in, it is their resilience. It's that resilience that brought Israel to defeat its enemies in 48 and 56 and 67 and 73 and 82, the first Lebanon War in 82, the first Intifada, the second Intifada, the second Lebanon War in 2006, and as rockets continued earlier this week to rain down on Israeli cities in southern Israel. That same resilience is what I hope, and I'm fairly certain and confident, will continue to ensure the greatest miracle of modern time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. If France and Germany and others agree those sanctions, especially in the monetary essence, restricting the bank, the central bank of Iran, will the Russians and the Chinese go along with that?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question. The Russian and the Chinese play a very dangerous role, I think, in today's, on the diplomatic or international stage. They have, first of all, they have their more narrow mind, they have their more narrow interests. They are, they think about what's coming into their pocket and about their, economic benefits that they gain from continuing to do business with Iran. I think that Russia also has a different interest, which is always to stick it to the United States whenever it can, because it feels like it needs to try to reestablish itself as a superpower, and therefore if America goes one way, they're always going to go the other way. And you see that quite often that happens when America and Russia knock heads. I think, though, that ultimately both of those countries understand that Iran a nuclear Iran would be a threat to them as well. And therefore, if this report is really as harsh as it's said to be, and it's all speculative at the moment, I think that maybe that could play a role in getting these countries, China and Russia, to maybe change their current positions. But even so, Israel has argued that we don't need the Security Council to do it. It would also be enough for independent countries on their own to pass sanctions. If you get, like Germany continues to do billions of dollars of trade with Iran, right? Why is Germany doing billions of dollars of business with the Iranians? That's a great question. Why is Austria doing billions of dollars of business with the Iranians? So it would be enough to get these countries also to stop their economic trade and crack down and impose independent, nation-based sanctions that could also maybe have the desired effect. Yeah.
Maybe I can help you with a question that puzzled me for a long time. Iran has a lot of money, has these missiles that can go any place. They're very smart, very shrewd businessmen. And there are 20,000, I don't know how many nuclear heads that you can buy on the black market. Why did they buy a couple of those?
First, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much money they have. Look, their economy is pretty. Oh, that's for sure. I mean, that I have a lot of people have more money than I have. But I think one of the main reasons, right, is you're 100% right. I mean, one of the speculation with regards to the Saudis is at the moment that the Iranians go nuclear, the Saudis will skip over the whole stage of building up a nuclear program and just buy nuclear weapons if they could get them on the black market. And I don't know if there are 20,000 warheads, but they're, rough estimates, there's a significant amount that maybe you can get fissionable material here and some rogue weapon device there and kind of throw something together. The Iranians want it for a different reason. Iran wants to position itself and create a status for itself as a superpower. Now, to buy a nuclear device in the black market and say, okay, now I got a weapon in a suitcase, that's not going to do it. They want to have the status symbol of having their own independent, domestically built nuclear program that they operate and they have. I'll ask you a different question. They have loads of oil. Why do they need nuclear energy? It doesn't make sense. They have runaway inflation, high unemployment. They're spending billions of dollars on this thing that they don't even need it for their energy purposes. They don't require it. They should be putting their money, for example, in building refinement, oil refining infrastructure, because they can't refine their own oil. They have to import 40% of refined fuel to just basically drive their own cars. Why aren't they building that infrastructure with the billions of dollars? Why are they giving $1 billion annually to Hezbollah, hundreds of millions to Hamas? Because they have other interests, right? Their main interest is to undermine, weaken Israel, spread the revolution throughout the region, and they do that with the Al-Quds force. They do that by undermining more moderate Arab regimes in the region, but they also are very interested in establishing their own capabilities so they can set themselves as a superpower and solidify their control over Iran. That no one will ever, they are paranoid people, the regime. No one will ever come in and try to topple them. And they believe that a nuclear program will be able to solidify the regime and prevent them from ever losing control of the country. Yes, sir.
Earlier this week, the media in Israel and the United States, to some extent, carried reports that Israel was imminently preparing to attack Iran. Now, generally, most countries don't go to war in newspapers or the media. So my question to you is Israel preparing to attack Syria in the near future?
So I don't think so. No, I don't think that Israel is planning to attack Syria. At the moment, it wouldn't be in Israel's interest to get involved in what's happening in Syria, although I think that the Syrian people need some help and they could use some assistance because 3,000 of them have already been slaughtered by the violent regime led by Bashar Assad. I don't think that Israel has any interest at the moment in attacking in Syria. What Israel would like to see, though, is some sort of resolution to what's happening in Syria, ideally to see Assad fall and someone more moderate take over. Is that going to happen? I'm very skeptical. Unfortunately, when we look throughout history, we see that vacuums in the Middle East are never filled by a moderate element. Unfortunately, they're always filled by more radical elements. You look at what happened after the U.S. withdrawal from Lebanon, the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, Israel's withdrawal from Lebanon, Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, all led to the rise to power of radical, the Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever it might be. And therefore, what I think we have to be concerned about, the same thing happening definitely in Egypt, where the Muslim Brotherhood is strong, but also potentially in Syria. And that's why you have a whole argument in a debate today within the defense establishment in Israel, is the devil you know better than the devil you don't know? And some people say yes, other people, I think the prevailing assessment that I hear is that it would be in Israel's interest for Assad to fall, for that axis of evil that connects Iran with Syria, with Hezbollah, excuse me, to be broken, for Syria is the greatest supplier of weaponry to Hezbollah, for that to be cut off. That would be in Israel's strategic interest. If that will happen, I don't know. Yes, sir.
What is your opinion if Israel had capital punishment which would have prevented...
The death penalty.
Pardon?
Death penalty.
The death penalty. The situation of bringing back into the population murderers, which they've done.
Well, first of all, we probably wouldn't have 5,000 Palestinians in our prisons if there was such a thing as capital punishment. I don't know. You know, Israel has the death penalty, but it was only for Nazi criminals, right? And they don't really exist nowadays, by the most part. The question of whether Israel would legislate such a law to be used against Palestinian terrorists is, I think, something that needs to be discussed today. I agree with you. It's something that needs to be debated and should genuinely be concerned. And Israel should make a decision. Does it want to have it or does it not want to have it? What we have to consider, though, is whether it would succeed in deterring Palestinian terrorists or would not succeed in deterring Palestinian terrorists. In other words, if you kill them but they continue to attack you, then what benefit are you really getting from it, right? If you kill them and then it succeeds in deterring the future Palestinian next terrorist from attacking you, then there's genuine benefit. I know for a fact that, for example, in the Second Intifada, when a suicide bomber would blow himself up or herself up, Israel would go to the home of that suicide bomber and demolish the home. They would take one of these D9 bulldozers and demolish the home. But after they did it a bunch of times, they then, after a couple of years, they conducted a study, and it had no effect. It didn't deter anyone. It didn't stop them. Now, there's a difference between killing people and demolishing their homes. But I think that it needs to be something that Israel needs to look at and debate a little more carefully. I'll say even more than that. Why, for example, if there's something called the Geneva Convention, right, which stipulates and regulates what you need to provide to someone who is a prisoner in your prison. Gilad Shalit was not given any access to the outside world, got no visitation rights. The Red Cross was not given access to him. We allow murderers in our prisons to get married, right, to have conjugal visits, to get first degrees and second degrees by correspondence. Forget about even visitation rights that they get from their family members. Why is Israel giving them all of this if they don't have to? And I think that that's also a potential way to leverage and to put some pressure on the other side that possibly could have led to them reducing their demands. And I was shocked that that wasn't something that was used as a tactic by Israel. So I think there's a lot more that we could even do before even moving towards capital punishment. I mean, that's also true, right? You kind of play into their hands. You also wonder, these are people who believe that when they get killed, they are going on to some better world, right? So maybe you're just helping them get there, ultimately. At the same time, though, I really don't know. I don't know what the right answer would be about it. I think, though, that after Gilad Shalit's release, now is the time for Israel to debate the issue more seriously, to consider a more official policy, maybe to set an official policy. Look, this country, for example, in the beginning of the war in Afghanistan, a lot of soldiers were kidnapped. And America has a very clear policy in these issues. They don't negotiate, right? Now, say what you want, but as a policy, it's effective because you saw that kidnappings, which were going up, suddenly went drastically down because it's not worth it. Right? What is Israel telling everyone? No, keep on doing it. It's in your interest. Terrorism and abduction of soldiers pays. And that sends the wrong message. So it's also important to create an official policy of what are we going to do? Will we continue to do what we're doing now, which is release 1,000 prisoners? Or will we create a different policy of how we're going to, as a country, deal with such scenarios? And I think that now is the time, whether it's to consider capital punishment, it's to consider taking away some of the rights that they have in jail. It's to consider some other sort of policy. I don't know what it would be, but now is definitely the right time before another soldier is, God forbid, kidnapped. Yes, sir?
There are a few related issues. The word Turkey comes to mind. Turkey, Lebanon, and the Mediterranean gas fields, and the Turkish threats to export flotillas, Gaza busting, and the current information. I'd be curious about the two ships
that are on their way right now. Yeah.
The possible Turkish.
Yeah. So Turkey's not accompanying them at the moment. So I think that's definitely a good sign. Look, Turkey is a very sore spot. I mean, I think that it's a very unfortunate what's happened to Turkish-Israeli relations, but especially I remember back in November of 2008, I joined President Shimon Peres on his first state visit overseas, which was to Ankara, and he stayed in the presidential compound and was really received like royalty. Remember one night he invited journalists, us Israeli journalists who had accompanied him, to come meet him in the presidential compound, and he was sitting there sipping wine, and we were all kind of plotzing on our faces, falling asleep, and he's going and telling stories till 12 o'clock at night. He's quite the Energizer Bunny. But anyhow, back then, we were the best of friends. They visited us, we visited them, tourism, economic exchange, trade. Forget about the fact that Israeli fighter jets flew there almost on a monthly basis. I mean, joint training, their Air Force, our Air Force, and search and rescue operations, everything together. And look at where we are today. And I think that it's quite clear that this isn't Israel's fault, that this is Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan's strategy to position Turkey as the new leader in the Arab and Muslim world. You saw his tour de force a couple weeks ago where he traveled throughout the region, went to Cairo, went to other countries, to basically say, okay, all your leaders are now gone, but here I am, and I'm going to be the new guy in town. And I think that it also is a result of the fact that the Turks wanted to join the European Union. And then they made all these constitutional changes, for example, taking away some of the power that the military had over the regime. That was Ataturk's idea back to preserve the secular character of the government. The military was supposed to be able to have the ability to overthrow any government, and that's now changed. And after they made all these changes, suddenly the EU said, whoops, we don't want you as a member. So when they got the cold shoulder from the West, they started to look east, and they saw Iran, Syria, more radical friends of theirs, and they became themselves more radical. Now, with all that said, I think that what restrains them today, they are members of NATO, right? So the possibility of them going to war with Israel or Cyprus over oil and gas, I think it exists. I would be very surprised if it happens. I think the same applies, for example, to accompanying a flotilla and creating a scenario where you could really have a potential flare-up in war between Israel's Navy and the Turkish Navy. I mean, just think, one shot fired by one of those sides could lead to a war between these two countries. I mean, God forbid, we should never know of such things. I think also the fact that they recently agreed to deploy an American radar in their territories, part of the European missile defense system that America has been trying to push forward, is also an indication that there's some American involvement. They're a member of NATO. I think that he's talking tough, he's shooting high, but ultimately I think that Turkey is not going to be looking to go to war with anyone anytime soon. Yes, ma'am?
Gaza. I understand some of the rockets that were shelled into Israel came from Libya, with a big supply of arms that the Arab Spring has control over.
Well, rockets spring forward, you know. So.
Exactly. I was wondering if it is known to what extent or how many of these rockets were taken out of Libya. And the other thing I want to ask you is, it's obvious to me that giving up land results in what happened in Gaza. Why would there be people in Israel who feel that giving up Judea and Samaria is going to be a good thing?
Okay. I'll start with the first question. With regards to Libya, there are intelligence reports that the Hamas, Islamic Jihad, have obtained certain capabilities and weaponry that went missing in Libya. We know that Gaddafi had large stockpiles, for example, of SAMs, shoulder-to-air missiles. One in particular is the SA-24, which is an advanced Russian-made shoulder-to-air missile, has quite a good range, can intercept and shoot down aircraft at high altitudes, and they've all gone missing. Israel believes and suspects that some of those have already made their way to Gaza, and Egyptian security forces have already uncovered large quantities in the Sinai en route, right, on their way to be smuggled into Gaza. What exactly the quantities are, I don't know. I haven't seen, and no one's telling me either. With regards to the second question, this is I think, the main dilemma that Israel's had for decades, ever since the 1967 Six-Day War. Should it concede this land for peace, or should it retain this land and look for a different alternative? Now, I think that for Israel at the moment, and you see that every consecutive government is embracing and adopting the two-state solution as the so-called solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is from a recognition that Israel does not want to be in control of another people. Israel does not want to have these people under its responsibility. And Israel ultimately wants to be able to be a country that retains its Jewish character. And the alternative to not moving forward with the two-state solution could potentially be one of two scenarios, at least the way I see it. The first scenario is the one-state solution. And you begin to hear a lot more people talking about it today. Now, the one-state solution, in my eyes, is not a solution, because ultimately, whether it takes 20, 30, 40, 50 years, whenever it'll be, we will be overcome number-wise, potentially, by them. Now, I know there's a whole debate about the demographics, whether it is as bad as it is or it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. I definitely don't, can't say for certain. And even the people who push in different directions. No one has a good grasp or handle on exactly where the numbers stand today. But ultimately, I don't think that would be in Israel's strategic interest. Now, the other alternative, if you don't want to move forward with those two, with the two states or the one state, is to create a state under which you have citizens, or, well, under which you have a people who don't receive citizenship, right? Now, I think that completely contradicts what Israel believes in as a democracy and the type of values that Israel is trying to establish for itself. And I think that Israelis wouldn't go for something like that, where they would be called out every Monday and Thursday as being an apartheid state and would be, again, in control and have second-class citizens. It's not something that Israel would want. So I think that what Israel's facing is this huge challenge. Now, look, the problem is there are two main problems, the way I see it, right? Problem number one is that the status quo, I'm not sure how viable it really is. Because what we're doing is unfortunately, the conflict continues, terrorism continues, and the standoff between us and them continues, the world continues to blame us, and everything is just continuing the way it's always been. The alternative, though, at the moment, like you pointed out, is that walking away today from the West Bank or Judea and Samaria today would be foolish from a security perspective, right? Because what you would have are, you already have rockets in the Gaza Strip raining down on your cities. What's to assure you that you wouldn't have the similar scenario in the West Bank? And therefore, you need what's called secure borders. You need, for example, a demilitarized Palestinian state. You need to have an Israeli presence in the Jordan Valley, because soon we're going to have the Eastern Front. America's pulling out of Iraq. Iraq, Jordan, and there you suddenly are in the West Bank in the new Palestinian state. Who's going to prevent weapons from flowing across that border? So it's extremely complicated. Now, Israelis are people who are disenchanted with the benefits they get from withdrawals because of what happened in the 2000 withdrawal from Lebanon, which brought Hezbollah to what it was in 2006 when we went to war against it, and the withdrawal in 2005, which brought Hamas to power. No question about it today. Even people who were in favor of the disengagement from Gaza understand that today. So therefore, there's only one way to do it. If you have a genuine partner on the other side. And I mentioned before, in my eyes at the moment, this is not a genuine peace partner. They're making every effort to show us that it's exactly the opposite, that they don't want a genuine peace with us. And therefore, I think it's sad, it's unfortunate that this is going to continue the way it currently is. We will face more delegitimization, we will face more diplomatic isolation, we will continue to be blamed for every bad thing that happens in the world, from Australia all the way to South America, because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, it's absurd, right? And I think that if there's anything more telling today of this so-called Arab Spring, is the fact that when the people of Egypt came up in Tahrir Square and rised up against their leadership, against the dictator Hosni Mubarak, it had nothing to do with us, right? It had nothing to do with Israel. The people of Syria fighting against Assad, that's got nothing to do with Israel. What happened in Yemen and Tunisia and in Libya, it's got nothing to do with Israel. These are people who want one simple thing, it's called freedom. And that's what they fought for. What potentially could come of that is something else. But you know, those people and advocates, and some of them in this country, and definitely in Europe, who said for years that if Israel were only to solve its conflict with the Palestinians, everything would be okay. I think this past year is the best proof of all that that's not the case. Yeah.
And Egypt. And you also have 4 states that are in very grave financial problems. Some of them with riots, Greece, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, all with financial problems, so kind of rioting going on. Could Iran be thinking of any moves in Southern Europe?
You know, that would be fascinating if so. I think that they have major problems at home. I don't think that they can project power at the moment that far. Nuclear weapons potentially could give them that capability, but I think that, you know, if you look at what Iran has done in recent years with the development of ballistic missiles, you know, they only call for one country to be destroyed, and that's Israel. Now, if that was the case, why do they develop missiles that can reach Eastern and Western Europe, right? What do they need them for? So I think that that needs to raise a serious question in everyone's minds of the potential projection of power and the deterrence that they might be able to create even with countries like Europe. But I don't see at the moment, their move to the Mediterranean, if they follow through with it, I think it's more of signaling, it's more of image, it's the ability to just show the world and kind of flex a muscle. Here we are, we're still around, we're powerful, we have capabilities, and all of you are kind of straddling the fence and you're weak and you're falling. I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Hey, I got it. Hey! I just was wondering if you were aware of that, going back to the Syria situation, that they have raised the limit since we pardoned the soldiers, 1,300 of the Palestinians, whatever, that they have raised from 100,000 to 400,000 to $1 million if they capture a Israeli soldier. Saudis, yeah.
Saudis,
I'm sorry, the Saudis, yes, have raised it to $1 million.
Well, I'm glad that Israeli soldiers are worth a lot of money, right? I mean, I think, I definitely would agree with that. But, look, what do you want me to tell you? These are bad people, right? And we saw, for example, that the families of suicide bombers over the years received compensation and packages from our old good friend Saddam Hussein, and we saw, all these leaders, they played very dangerous roles. This is further motivation. If it wasn't enough to know that you kidnap a soldier, you get back 1,000 of your friends from jail, now you also win the lottery. So that's great. I mean, they'll try again and they'll move forward. These are dangerous people, and we live in a very dangerous, volatile region and neighborhood, and I think that just adds to the mix of what we've been speaking about, without a doubt. Yeah.
I have a question. How do you compare the options of military strike against Iran, which you discussed, versus, continue using the Mossad to derail the Iranian program?
Yeah.
How do you compare them?
Well, it's two different levels, right? What the Mossad has allegedly done, and it doesn't take credit for what it's attributed to having done. For example, what we've known over the years, there's been the assassination of at least 5 or 6 scientists. A similar number, if not more, have defected to the West. And I think that that's much more of a joint Mossad-CIA operation of sorts. There was an operation that was launched a number of years ago called Brain Drain, which was aimed at draining the Iranian nuclear scientist's brain and getting scientists. And there's a number who are actually here in the United States. In my book, actually, I had the opportunity to meet with one of the CIA's top operatives who was involved in this program. And there's a number of Iranian scientists among us here in the United States, as a matter of fact, who were brought to America in order to try to stick a stick of sorts in the wheels of the Iranian nuclear machine. With all that said, I think there's no question all of these covert actions have succeeded to some extent in slowing down Iran's nuclear program. I remind you all, and you all remember how just a few years ago, back in 2002, 2003, we were told that any year now they're going to get the bomb, and they're moving forward. In 2005 they'll have it, or 2006, or 2007 is the critical year. When I was here in 2008, I was probably saying this is the critical year for Israel. The Mossad, the CIA, and possibly other Western intelligence agencies have done a brilliant job at being able to slow it down. The problem is that you have slowed them down, but they've mastered the technology, right? They're there. They are at the threshold. Now is the decision for them to take. Do we want to make the bomb? The man to make that decision, according to what I understand, is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, the man who replaced Khomeini when he passed away. Khamenei will make the decision when he feels that it's the right time for Iran. When does Israel believe that he'll feel it's the right time for Iran? When Iran feels that the world is weak and that the potential sanctions and economic pain that will be inflicted upon them will be the lowest or the most minimal possible. And they're going to wait for that unique opportunity. So I think that while that covert action has been successful in slowing them down, they've made it to the finish line. Now they just have to decide if they want to make the weapon or they don't want to make the weapon. And therefore, it's going to continue. I assume, this covert action will continue. It's going to be attempts to try to further slow them down. But it might be able to postpone them more, but it's not going to be able to stop them completely. The military action will also be able to delay their program. It depends who does it also. Let's put that out there. America has much stronger capabilities, has abilities to project its power differently than Israel, can put aircraft in the Persian Gulf, has Tomahawk missiles. America has stronger, larger abilities and capabilities than Israel does. If America were to attack, they have the ability to obliterate the program. Right? I'm not sure that Israel can, even in a number of waves of fighter jets. Israel, even if it delayed it, again, so that's what I'm saying. That's why I mentioned earlier. Even if you do attack and you set them back by a couple of years, it's not the end of it, right? There's got to be something else that's going to have to follow it up. What will that be? I don't know. But I think that that's a huge challenge for Israel. Yes, sir.
If Israel were to go ahead and do any of these things, you have the repercussions of the fact that you've taken it out, haven't accomplished anything except set it back. But at the same time, you've got a real mean person who doesn't like you. And with all the weapons that they do have, theoretically, they could come back against Israel.
Right.
Are they willing, is Israel willing to take that as, considering the fact that we have other problems as well?
Oh, that's the debate, right? In other words, if you attack, the assessment is that Hezbollah, with its 50,000 rockets and missiles, starts to shoot. Hamas and Islamic Jihad start to fire. Iran has ballistic missiles, they start to launch. Syria, who knows what they'll do, right? And therefore, you're going to face this massive war, and all you did was you set them back by a couple of years. Is it worth it? Now, let's think of the alternative, though. And you're going to have unbelievable devastation and destruction in Israel, and it won't be pretty. Let's be clear. Even with your iron domes and your arrows and all that, missiles will fall, people will get hurt and killed, there will be a large war, and something like Israel has never faced before. And I don't say that lightly. But at the same time, the alternative is that you have an Iran that becomes a nuclear country. They can forever threaten you. Your security will never be with the same confidence as it once was. The possibility of nuclear terrorism greatly increases like never before, that they hand off material or device to one of their proxies. They are the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. And the nuclear arms race that would set off is like something we've never seen before. And you would have countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and all these other countries in the Middle East that would also start to develop a nuclear program. And then what happens? You take a volatile region and turn it into something more of a nightmare. And I think that is what all together creates and makes Iran this existential threat for Israel. They're not yet an existential threat. But if they were to become nuclear, they would serve as an existential threat for Israel. I didn't even mention the fact that they also have the possibility to fire a nuclear warhead into Israel, right? But all that together is what creates the threat. Yes, ma'am?
How come there's no talk about Pakistan? Because they already got the weapons. Their government is very frail. They're siding with the Taliban. They don't like the idea that we went in there and killed bin Laden. And anything can happen to their regime.
I mean, 100%. There already is. The Islamic bomb exists, and it's in Pakistan, right? But, Israel is kind of limited in what it can do, right? I mean, Israel's definitely concerned. I've been in briefings with Defense Minister Barak where he's been asked again about Iran, and he said, the Islamic bomb's already out there in Pakistan. We have to keep an eye on Pakistan. But Israel, I don't think can reach all the way to Pakistan. Pakistan is very far away. Yeah. There's farther than Iran from Israel. They are the Americans are extremely involved there, and therefore, Israel needs also to depend on its allies and on its friends. And I think for that case, when it comes to a country like Pakistan, Israel has to rely on the United States to do the work there, and it's not something that Israel can get itself involved in. Iran, which is much closer, Israel is also the one that would feel the brunt, or is at the door of where the Iranians are going to be firing their missiles into, potentially.
So what if Al Qaeda gets a hold of the Pakistani weapons? They can just ship them anywhere.
100%. I mean, nuclear terrorism is a major issue today. There was a committee that was set up under the Bush the Bush administration called the Congressional Committee for the Non-Proliferation of Biological, Chemical, and Nuclear Weapons. And one of their basic conclusion was led by the Senator Graham and some other former congressmen. And their basic conclusion was that by 2013, there will be somewhere in the world a biological, chemical, or nuclear attack by terrorist organizations. So you're seeing a massive proliferation of all of this technology throughout the world. The gentleman in the back earlier spoke about the possibility to even purchase a nuclear device on the black market. I mean, this is a huge, huge challenge and concern, without a doubt.
Let's take two more, okay?
Yeah. The guy in the green.
How would Israel get to Iran? How would they fly?
There are a number of different routes, right? One route, which is the long route, would be to. I mean, by the way, it's a fascinating issue because each route has its different complications, right? If you want to go the quickest way, it would be to, let's say, maybe go over Jordan, Iraq, Iran, and then you're there. The other way would be to go up Saudi Arabia and then come up through the Gulf. Another alternative is to not go over Saudi Arabia, go all the way down the Red Sea and then up the Indian Ocean and then up through the Persian Gulf, which is the longest route possible. There's another, the northern route, which would be to go over Syria, Turkey, and then Iran, right? Or Turkey, Syria, Iran. But then what you have, and to kind of straddle the border all the way there, each one has its complications. No country is going to want Israel to fly over their territory. Israel has the potential, if it flies over Syria, for example, to come under some of their surface-to-air missile systems. If it flies over Iraq without American permission, as long as the Americans are still in Iraq, it faces potential resistance from that direction. Not that I think America would shoot down or intercept Israeli aircraft, but it could potentially not be too pretty. Jordan or Saudi Arabia, you fly over them, it seems that they were complacent or they were a partner to that operation, and therefore they could get very upset. Although I would argue that the Saudis have an even more reason to be concerned about what would happen if Iran went nuclear, and they're possibly even pushing Israel today, and I think they may even be hoping. You saw it in WikiLeaks, right, the cut off the head of the snake comments that they were making. They're extremely concerned with what will happen if Iran goes nuclear. So there's all these different possibilities. Look, Israel has limited mid-air refueling capability. They don't have a lot of aircraft. The number of how many they have is actually classified, but it's extremely limited. And the fighter jets that it has, the F-16Is and the F-15Is that are capable of reaching Iran, will not be able to stay over Iranian airspace for long, right? They'll have to come back because they'll be on the last drops of their fuel. So I think that that's possibly the greatest challenge. I mean, I wrote a story, I'll give you just one example. I wrote a story a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, about how the Air Force was doing this new training on what they called hot fueling. Basically it's very dangerous or risky to fuel up a fighter jet when its engines are already burning, right? Because you have the potential for a massive fire. But one of the things that you want to do is that if you just put the fueled up aircraft in the hangar and then you drive it out to the runway and then you wait to take off, you're burning a significant percentage of your fuel capacity. So what they're doing a lot more of now is they're fueling up on the runway with the aircraft already with their engines burning, so that when they get to the max, then they take off. So they have as much fuel as possible, because when you're facing an enemy like Iran, you might have to fly all the way there and all the way back, and you need to have every last drop of fuel is going to make the difference. Let's take the last question. Yes?
Yes, sir. You and others talk about sanctions. The thought being that tougher sanctions could cause Iran to change people. A couple of weeks ago, Fareed Zakaria, who was president of Iran, who said unequivocally that no sanctions would cause them to change their policies. So I'm a skeptic. I'm naive. Convince you of sanctions.
The same Fareed Zakaria, by the way, was then the one who came out recently and called for diplomacy and negotiations, and that we should sit and talk to the Iranians, and that's the way, right? And I think if anything, what we've seen over the years is that negotiations are used by the Iranians to fool the world into thinking that they're cooperating, and then to press forward like never before with their nuclear progress. I don't know how, again, I'm very skeptical myself, right? They have made unbelievable progress over the years. As I mentioned before, they're at the threshold. They're there, right? For them to stop today would be extremely difficult. For them to do it, because they're already, it's in your hands' reach. Why would you, your arms' reach? Why would you now stop? What sanctions can do, though, is that if you really hit them hard, you'll also slow down their nuclear progress, because they will have more limited resources than they have today, and they have a lot of what they need to do with the little that they have. So it also has the potential to slow down their installation, development, and production of new centrifuges. It could potentially slow them down, even if it's a few months, maybe longer. Could it potentially get them to stop the program completely? I don't know. But what I always say is that we don't know, because we've never tried it. And I'm much more concerned about the alternative, which is a military strike against their facilities that would bring upon Israel this unbelievable wrath from Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, and potentially other countries in the region. And therefore, it's something that needs to be, it's a process that should be exhausted for the sake of everyone. And it hasn't been exhausted. And therefore, I think it's imperative that at least we try to do something like that and try to move forward, because the alternative is not prettier. Now, with that said, there is also, I think, important to understand that the green movement, which we did see back in 2009, and it did pop up again a year ago, exists. It's there, right? It's not fighting yet. It's not coming out. It's been beaten badly by the Basij, which are this group of thugs led by this force of a police of sorts by the regime. But you speak to most analysts today within the government, and they talk about two clocks that are ticking. There's the nuclear clock, and there is the revolution clock, right? I think that people want to believe, maybe it's just wishful thinking, I don't know, but that this regime will one day fall. Which clock is ticking faster? That's the million-dollar question, or the nuclear weapon question. But that's why no one can really know, and no one knows, and therefore you can't rely on the revolution clock to tick faster than the nuclear clock. I mean, yeah, thank you for that, because there's no question that had, I mean, I don't know if there's no question. I've heard this from a lot of different people, and I think it does make sense. Had when there was the June 2009 elections and the people fought back and took to the streets, if you remember, it took the President of the United States a few days to come out and really throw his support behind them, as did, you didn't see the support from any of the European countries. Now, I think that it makes sense, and I've heard this from people within the Israeli government whose job is to watch what happens in Iran, that had they felt that they had the support of the world, they had the support, not even the economic or physical support, but the moral support, that would have given them the spirit to press forward and to fight. And they didn't see that. And alternatively, you actually saw the opposite now, with when Mubarak was coming under fire and the governments of the world did not align themselves behind him. It gave the people of Egypt, who were in Tahrir Square, I think the motivation and encouragement to move forward, and they succeeded in toppling him. So, those are two opposite sides of it. Again, with the clocks that are ticking, it's unclear which one's ticking faster. And I think that we can't rely on the revolution clock to move faster than the nuclear one. And therefore, something's got to give. Something will have to happen in the coming months, in the coming year, whether it will be, again, more covert action that will delay them more, whether it will be sanctions, or whether there will be a military option that will be taken and will be used and employed that will change, I think we have to understand, will change forever the Middle East. Thank you all very much. Thank you.